Welcome to the TK Show with the Athletic Bay Area's Editor-in-Chief, Tim Kawakami.
All right, everybody, Tim Kawakami here, TK Show. Really glad to have on as my special guest today, someone I've known for a real long time, someone who's been involved in sports for a long time, and basically he's a mogul. Basically, he's becoming a mogul, has been a mogul, I'm not even sure. But for the interest of the right now, he happens also to be Jimmy Garoppolo's agent, representative, lawyer, all those things. It's Don Yee. Don, how you doing today? Good to have you on.
Good. I'm doing well, Tim. Thank you for having me. Fun to be on your show.
Great. Been wanting to talk to you for a long time. Well, obviously, we've known each other for a long time. But then Jimmy Garoppolo gets traded to the 49ers. You're there at the press conference, sitting next to Parag Marathe, as noted by John Lynch. Just wonder, as his guy, just what was that like? Were you surprised when it happened October 30th? And what's it been like since then?
Let's see. First part of your question, was I surprised that it happened? I wasn't surprised. I think, I'm going into I think this is my 30th year in the business, Tim, and any time around the trade deadline, you just kind of have to, have your head on a swivel. So from that standpoint, I really wasn't surprised. But how has it been since then? Well, frankly, we're fairly, in terms of how we manage our clients, fairly clinical in our approach, because they've got to go out and execute and do a job under a lot of scrutiny. And so to a certain extent, I know this might sound a little counterintuitive, but there's not any glamour associated with it, other than making sure your client is supported and that their focus is on their job.
And watching him do fairly well, by the way, that must be pretty nice to you.
Yeah, it's he's a really nice guy, just a very special person, and I'm glad to see his hard work paying off.
Now, I know the Patriots are, they don't tell people what they're going to do, but was there any sense that Jimmy wanted to be traded? Had there ever been a discussion like, okay, at some point he's going to move to another team?
Well, when you're in this type of situation, every party in these kinds of situations knows exactly what their rights are. In this business, everybody is always thinking 2 to 3 moves ahead. And at the same time, though, you have to stay in the present because you can't really assume anything because the sands are always shifting constantly and literally from day to day as you get closer to trade deadline or something like the draft, for example. And so, from that standpoint, you kind of rely on your experience and your instincts. And I felt personally that something could happen. And but again, you just can't really make a lot of assumptions and jump too far ahead.
Now, you also have to represent somebody named Tom Brady. So has that been interesting for you? Was that a little weird representing the both of them and, Jimmy kind of waiting his turn behind Tom Brady, your other client?
I think, no. They're both terrific people. And, I'm really blessed and fortunate, very lucky to be associated with people of this quality. And not just of this quality, but also a high degree of intelligence. And we also have been lucky to work with them from the time they came out of college. So, we've all been working together a long time. Everybody kind of understands the MO. Everybody understands the business as well. And we also understand what we can control and what we can't control. And so to that extent, I wouldn't categorize it as weird at all, except it's just kind of business as usual.
I mean, and you were informing Jimmy probably that Tom has no intention of ever retiring, I guess. I mean, how informed did Jimmy need to know about the situation in New England as he's backing up Tom?
That's a good question. I can't, I don't ever get into, the conversations between myself and my clients because it's privileged, right?
Yep.
But, at the same time, to be frank with you, these kinds of things, I guess from the outside looking in, people will draw certain conclusions about how things might happen, but I would tell you that just like in your business, how the sausage is actually made may be very different than what people from on the outside think.
Now, okay, well, let's go. Jimmy comes here. Obviously, he's a pending free agent. That's probably a big part of why New England traded him. Have you had any negotiations with the 49ers? Is it your intent to say, let's maybe have a discussion? Have you brought this up to them? Have they brought it up to you about a long-term deal?
Sure, that's I can understand the question. It's just, I've got my own policy of not discussing publicly those kinds of topics, but I'm sure, of course, those discussions will occur, right? And in fact, the day of Jimmy's press conference, there's just a lot of joshing back and forth sometimes about these things, particularly when you're dealing with people that you know really well, and we're just all happy to see him doing well at this point.
Okay, I'll throw out another couple questions on these. I understand your stance on this, but we all know what the franchise tag number is likely to be, $24 million. Do you use that? I've heard this. You just multiply it by 2 as a starting base on what you would want a guaranteed number to be. Is that about right, you would think, just generally for something like this?
Well, I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to get into my thoughts, on that subject, Tim, in terms of, a strategy, for example, because, we still have a long way to go. We've got 3 games left in the regular season, but again, as I said earlier, due to the current collective bargaining agreement, everybody in the business, everyone always knows kind of what their rights are, right? And what the numbers are. Everything's fairly transparent these days, which actually makes things a lot easier than the pre-CBA days when I started in this business. And so, because of that transparency, things can be more efficient as well. But at this juncture, it wouldn't be wise of me to assume anything on the part of the Niners until we can, really figure out how and when and best to proceed.
We've seen Kirk Cousins go under the franchise tag and been saying he's comfortable with it. Is that something that you think Jimmy would be comfortable? 1 year franchise tag, that's fine by me?
Well, I don't want to get into his emotions on the subject, really. I don't think that would be appropriate in this particular forum. But to try to compare situations, I don't think that's always a good thing to do for someone in my position because, frankly, I don't really know any of the dynamics or the facts behind the situation with Kirk Cousins and the Redskins. There's, and in every situation, I can share this with you, Tim, when it comes to the business of the sport, there are always lots of facts and dynamics behind the scenes that play into things that, those on the outside don't know. And I don't know Kirk's situation, and, he's obviously a great player, and he's doing really well for them, and we'll see what happens at the end of the season.
So you don't sit there and say, okay, touchdown, Jimmy just threw a touchdown, 49ers win. There's another $5 million we're going to add to this. Oh, another win? That might be another $8 million.
No, it's a little more nerve-wracking than that, actually, Tim. A lot more nerve-wracking.
Well,
I actually, for me, most important player, I probably watch Joe Staley more than anybody. I really like him.
Yep. Well, I think Jimmy likes him too, by the way. I think that's a nice combination.
Terrific player.
Yep. Now, I know, I guess a little known fact, Don, you were very close to maybe becoming the president of the 49ers years ago. There were conversations of that. What was that like going through that? Was that something that you thought would be a different path for you? And what's your relationship maybe with the 49ers now?
Well, that's probably something I probably best kept to myself in terms of all the particulars and ins and outs. But in terms of the relationship now, it's very, very good. It's a terrific relationship. They've got an A-plus management team in place there. I'm sure you've already spent some time with John Lynch and Parag and Adam Peters, our new director of player personnel, and And Jed, I think, has done a fantastic job of assembling this particular team. And for me, I actually hadn't been to that facility in a number of years, but after having spent some time there recently, it was very clear to me it's a very positive environment. I think Kyle Shanahan's a very positive person, a good communicator, really showing a lot of poise, and I think they've got a really solid foundation for the future.
When you knew Jimmy was coming to the 49ers, did you think, man, this is a great match, specifically with Shanahan's offense and what's going on there?
Well, my football opinions in terms of, the sport of it, I tend to keep to myself because largely I'm not in there in the locker rooms and meeting rooms. I'm not a coach, but I can say this, that Kyle's got a terrific reputation. His accomplishments speak for themselves, and in person, he's a terrific guy to speak with. Very good communicator, as I said earlier, and he spent his entire life in football. And as well as John is one of the few general managers who's had an entire career at the NFL level and strapped it on, and in my view, probably a future Hall of Famer. And so with these two who spent their entire lives at this particular level, I think things are it's just a solid group to move forward with for the future.
Just having waited, for years for Jimmy to get this chance, what has it been like just for you personally to see him get starts, make passes, get wins, and just see it kind of developing for you?
It's really exciting just because everybody's just very happy for him because he's had to put in a tremendous amount of work to get his game to this point. And, that's part of the sausage making, that I referred to earlier. In the off season, these guys really put in a tremendous amount of time trying to just hone their craft. And it's even more difficult in this day and age to a certain extent, Tim, because the CBA limits the amount of time they can spend with their coaches. So every player in the NFL, every off season, they've got to kind of construct their own off season plan as to how they're going to get better at their particular position. And so to see Jimmy experience at least 2 victories and play reasonably well is really gratifying.
Well, I mean, we've gone through this issue, and I think it's just been a sea change for the 49ers, and just what one player can produce just for the mood and for the emotion. I think it's going to be very interesting. Again, I'm going to ask you another one of these questions. It'll be the last one, but John Lynch has said, or I think both Lynch and Shanahan said, that they don't expect there to be any talks on the contract until the offseason. Would you imagine that this is something that's going to happen? These conversations will happen pretty quickly, though, and once this offseason is, would you want there to be discussions pretty quickly?
Again, I don't really want to get into, my own personal thoughts on this because I really feel like, it's my duty to keep that between myself and the client always. But, again, in these kinds of situations, it always helps to have good communication, and both parties know the business well. And so I don't want to, and this is John's first year, and he's trying to establish not only a culture on the field and in his building, but also a managerial philosophy. And so it would be presumptuous of me to try to suggest anything, as to how he should proceed.
All right. Well, let's move on to something else that you're deeply involved in, fascinating.
Sure.
The Pacific Pro Football League. What are you, the founder? You're the commissioner? I'm not sure what your title is there. Just chief, overlord, something there.
Well, I guess technically founder.
Okay. Now,
and CEO, and one of my co-founders is former 49er Ed McCaffrey.
Yes, my goodness, yes.
And so, what we did in January of 2017, we publicly announced this particular project. It would be a professional football league initially based in Southern California with 4 teams, one in each of the largest counties. And the player population would be those players not yet eligible for the NFL. And they would be professional. They would play a professional style of game with professional protocols, rules, equipments, etc.
And you're talking about a summer launching? Is this still on course for that?
Thus far we are. We're trying to launch in July 2018.
Okay.
The league would play its games in July and August, right after the NBA Finals, and we would conclude just prior to college football and the NFL kicking off.
And you would assume that these players could feed maybe right into an NFL training camp, something like that?
Yeah, one of the initiatives, right, is to get them ready for professional football. We've noticed in the marketplace a significant divergence between the college game and the NFL style of play, and we feel that divergence is causing perhaps some perceived drop in quality in NFL play. And really it's because that the players coming into the league from this one source, which is college football, they're actually not trained to play NFL football. Yeah. They're trained to play college football. And so oftentimes, I always found it distressing when there was a really good athlete, a really good player who performed well in college, who would struggle in the NFL, and the media, with the media scrutiny there is, would get a lot of criticism, and I really never liked the term bust. I think it's a pretty harsh term for a lot of young guys, and what people may not realize is that they're actually not trained for NFL football.
Yep.
And so it would be asking, if in the culinary world somebody who was trained to make Neapolitan pizza, become a sushi chef, right? And it doesn't really make that much sense. And so what we're trying to do with this project is actually train people in the game of professional football.
Now, did I read correctly that Mike Shanahan is one of your advisors on this?
Yes, Mike Shanahan's on the advisory board.
That's interesting. Just randomly, that's interesting for people here. We're talking about
he's a good advisor.
Yeah,
Tim. He's one of, I think, only 9 living people, head coaches who've won at least 2 Super Bowls.
Very limited field. Obviously.
Yeah, there's 100 U.S. senators, Tim.
I like that number. And also, are we talking about players who've just run out of college eligibility and yet haven't been drafted, or would you have some players who've been drafted and didn't make teams? What are you talking about, the roster?
No, the player population would be only those players not yet eligible for the NFL. So that would be, for example, perhaps a player directly out of high school.
Okay.
Or a player who is coming out of community college and he's not yet eligible for the NFL draft. It could be potentially a player who's actually on a Division I roster or some other college roster and not playing due to one reason or another. Or it could be somebody who's playing at a high level, Division I, as a freshman or sophomore, and perhaps that person feels that they will enter the NFL draft as soon as they're eligible, but they want to play professional football for a year to get ready and adjust to professional protocols.
Okay. Well, you got a lot of other things going on. Tell me about head coach ranking. This is something you're involved with. It's a Twitter account, HCR Football. What's this all about, Don?
Yeah, it's a website called headcoachranking.com, and it's just really started kind of just out of my own personal NFL fandom. We all like to watch the game, right? And one thing that I noticed was that, and I've always felt that one of the most critical but one of the areas of the game that isn't covered as extensively is each coach's game management skills. And so what I've done is, gotten a group of people together, and what we do is grade each head coach's in-game game management decisions. And we apply a numerical value to that, similar to a quarterback having a quarterback rating or passer rating.
Yep.
And using this particular metric, perhaps fans and the media can get some sense of where we feel, at least, all the head coaches rate relative to each other with respect to their game management skills.
Interesting. Have you gotten any reaction to it from some coaches? And I know you represent some coaches, so what's the
Yeah, no, I've actually spoken to a number of coaches about it, and they've actually all found it pretty fascinating, and they agree that, for example, when you become a first-time head coach, and your butt is in the seat and you're making those calls in real time, they quickly realize they've never really actually had any reps doing that, and that's why sometimes you'll see, first-time head coaches, until you actually confront a particular situation, it's hard to always know exactly what you would do under the gun.
Yep.
And coaching it's a really difficult job. Your job's performed in front of millions, and you've got to make these split-second judgments and decisions while everybody's watching you, and you're trying to also take in fluid information, right, in real time. And so that's why we started the site, to just see, how we feel each coach's judgment is during games.
All right, Don, I'll wrap this up here with you, and I've talked about this for years, just the Asian representation in sports, Asian Americans. You and I have been at it for a long time, and there aren't a ton of others even that have joined us over the years. What do you think? I mean, you go out, and I'm sure you talk to students, Asian students or students of all kinds. What do you emphasize to, say, a young Asian American who's listening to this who would want to get into either representation or television or coaching? What do you think is important for a young Asian American or any minority to hear about getting into the sports field?
Well, I think number one is that you really can achieve whatever you want to achieve if you really apply yourself completely. And as you know, Tim, in this particular business, everybody who's at least gotten, just to get to a point where you get a paycheck, right? You've got to really dedicate completely, and which means that you've got to be willing to make certain sacrifices, right? I would say that would be number one. Number two, I would say, you have to be willing to tolerate some risk, right? So, for example, if you wanted to get into coaching and you wanted to coach in the NFL, well, there's only 32 teams. So every position on that particular team, there's only 32 of them, right? And that's a very risky proposition. And so you've got to be able to tolerate it. But I think the most important thing, is that you seek out mentors and not be afraid to approach those people and not be afraid to be persistent in approaching those people, because ultimately in the sports business, at least in the industry, every part of the industry, and it doesn't matter if it's football or some other sport or if it's in the media sphere, it's a competitive industry. And so you've got to be able to show some level of competitiveness, right? And if there's people that you want to learn from or meet or try to draw some association with, you've got to kind of stick to that and think with a competitive mindset.
We've talked about this. We've got to put together this Asian Sports Council. We really do. There's some interesting people, really sharp people out there. You and I know them, and there are others out there. But I think that's a really important thing. And let's put it mind together. And let's do that. Let's absolutely do that.
Absolutely.
And meanwhile, I will end this with the question I ask everybody on my show. I am very curious on this one. Don Yee, what's your favorite restaurant?
Well, I have a rotating group, okay, because I like to try new places. But, I would say my current favorite restaurant would be OB Bear. It's called OB Bear in Koreatown, Los Angeles.
Okay, fantastic.
All right.
Fantastic. That sounds like a Bourdain place or something. That sounds like you and Anthony Bourdain could hang out and throw back
Korean fried chicken.
Oh, my goodness. That sounds great. All right, Don. Listen, I really appreciate it. I'm really glad we got you on, and I think you might be hearing from me in the next few weeks, just randomly.
Great.
Just randomly, I think. Probably
okay. All right. Well, thank you for having me on, Tim.
You got it, Don. Great.
Okay.
All right, everybody. That's Don Yee. Thanks. All right, that's the show. Thanks, everybody.